Hello and welcome to the 2020 Newbery-Caldecott and Legacy Virtual Banquet. I'm Cecilia P. McGowan, President of the Association for Library Service to Children, also known as ALSC. Although we aren't together in person in our finest attire to celebrate this year's winners over dinner, I hope you're as dressed up and as excited as I am as we gather together for the virtual banquet. Now, more than ever, it's vital we celebrate those who harness the power of storytelling and bring us together in radically different ways. This year's honorees wear their developed views, masterful skills, and legacy of greatness on their sleeves. And I'm so grateful we can be with them here tonight. We'll start the presentation of the Randolph Caldecott Medal, followed by the John Newbery Medal, and finally, the Children's Literature Legacy Award. Before the presentation of awards, I would like to acknowledge everyone who makes ALSC thrive. The dedicated members of the 2019-2020 Board of Directors, the enthusiastic and patient ALSC staff that support the board and members in our work, and the 2020 Newbery, Caldecott, and Legacy committees, guided by ALSC Priority Group consultant Carol Phillips. I'm delighted that so many of you are watching this event live. We know that the viewer count is also composed of past presidents of the association, publishers, editors, authors, illustrators, vendors, members, and many others who work to support library service and literature for children. Special thanks to tonight's honored publishers who've donated to the Melcher Scholarship Fund, to the corporate sponsors of ALSC professional awards and scholarships, and to the Friends of ALSC. Your donations enhance all of our programs and services, and we thank you for your continued support. Thanks to all of you for joining us tonight and your continued dedication, work, and friendship to ALSC and its mission. You help make us what we are. For their continued commitment and collaboration in reaching our shared goal of equitable library service to youth, I thank the American Association of School Librarians, AASL, the Young Adult Library Services Association, YALSA, and the ALA affiliate Reforma, the National Association to Promote Library and Information Services to Latinos and the Spanish-speaking, our partners in the Pura Belpre Award. Finally, the many roundtables and affiliates of ALA who join us in promoting incredible children's books which celebrate the variety and diversity of children's literature. Now, let's begin the awards presentation with the chair of the 2020 Randolph Caldecott Selection Committee, Julie Roach.
Hello, my name is Julie Roach, and it has been my great pleasure to chair the 2020 Randolph Caldecott Selection Committee. The Randolph Caldecott Medal is awarded annually to the illustrator of the most distinguished picture book for children published in the United States in the preceding year. I want to thank the 2020 Caldecott Committee for their dedication, their diligence, their curiosity, their sense of humor, and their spirit. Each one of them is extraordinary, and it was a marvelous year full of exceptional art in picture books for children. The 2020 Caldecott Committee chose 3 honor books. Bear Came Along, illustrated by Lei Wen Pham and published by Little Brown Books for Young Readers. With deft lines and smart compositions, Pham creates an irresistible river adventure to fall into, full of twists and turns and surprises. The color gets stronger on every page, as does the tension and Bear's growing band of animal friends. Double Bass Blues, illustrated by Rudy Gutierrez, published by Alfred A. Knopf Books for Young Readers, an imprint of Random House Children's Books. The sounds reverberate right off the page, visually capturing the auditory experience of music. The lines and colors mix, swoop, and swirl, protecting, guiding, and inspiring Nick as he balances his life at school and at home and makes his way between the two. Going Down Home with Daddy, illustrated by Daniel Minter, and published by Peachtree Publishing Company, Incorporated. An African-American family reunion gives a boy a chance to connect to his vibrant roots. With acrylic washes and Adinkra symbols, Minter's layered art tells a moving story of intergenerational love and ancestral memory.
Hello, everyone. I want to introduce our special guests who are here with us this evening. First, I would like to introduce everyone to Lei-Wen Pham, illustrator of Bear Came Along.
Hi.
Next, I would like to introduce everyone to Rudy Gutierrez, illustrator of Double Bass Blues.
Great.
And finally, I would like to introduce everyone to Daniel Minter, illustrator of Going Down Home with Daddy.
Great.
Thank you for being with us tonight.
Sure.
And may I add my congratulations to you, Lei-Wen and Daniel and Rudy. What an amazing set of books for children to encourage them to explore their worlds and to celebrate the great, great illustrations for kids. And now, because I like to celebrate early and often, I would like to make a toast to all three of you. And have a wonderful, wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you.
Cheers.
I'm wondering, from you three, was there a Caldecott book that affected your life or career that you would like to share with us? Aside from this one?
Right.
I have loved kids' books since I was a kid. I think it's how I kind of learned to enter the world. And I didn't really know what Caldecotts were. I just knew that those books in the library with the medal on them were usually pretty good. But I don't think as a kid or even as a teenager I paid any attention to it. It wasn't until I went to art school that I saw a book called Sam Bangs and Moonshine by Evelyn Ness, whose name I nearly forgot 2 seconds ago, but I just rallied. It was one of the most beautiful picture books I'd ever seen. And when I saw the medal on top of that one, I knew why that one had to win. And I think I just loved it because it was really unique. It didn't look like it had been drawn in any traditional way. It looked so out of its time. And I just remember staring at the pages. It was one of the first picture books that I ever looked at as a student, where I was trying to figure out how she did the illustrations. They were just so beautiful. And there were these moments where I realized, looking at the character's face, that you can't learn how to draw faces in school. You just have to know how to do it. And there were just some poses and faces that I just remember staring and salivating and just wondering, like, what kind of magic happened on that piece of paper to make that come across in the book.
One of the books that influenced me came along around the mid-70s, I guess, when I was just learning what an illustrator was. I didn't really understand it, but I saw the book illustrated by Leo and Diane Dillon called Ashanti to Zulu. It was beautifully stylized, beautiful people illustrated in the book. It was also showing people from different places in Africa. And I realized, at that time, that book kind of widened my horizons and opened my eyes and perspective of what a children's book can actually be. For me, it stretched my imagination. And the way they handled the people, the patterns, the flow that went from the first page to the last page was just amazing and wonderful to watch, and it has stuck with me over the years. You know, that seeing that book, seeing the way that they handled their work was very inspirational to me.
That's a beautiful one.
Yeah. I think for me, it's strange, but it's not an individual book, but I would say an illustrator who I want to acknowledge, Tom Feelings, who, my God, first African-American to win a Caldecott. And I am aware that he wanted for a different book that I'm going to talk about, but I was really, really touched by the middle passage that he did. And reason being is that I do art that lands in a lot of different places, one of which I'm honored to do is children's books. But whether it's doing a mural, children's book, magazine piece, a gallery piece, it's always about touching people, speaking for people who maybe cannot speak for themselves. That's the highest that I can possibly do. And that's what Tom Feelings was doing, showing the pain, the perseverance, and the strength within his work. He was certainly an activist with his work. He was socially conscious. He fought for social justice. And it is about touching people always, always, always. And that's why I salute Tom Feelings.
We're here.
That was really beautiful. Thank you so much for your answers and for being here tonight. And I just want to raise a glass to the three of you and your talent and your beautiful books. Thank you so much for sharing them with us.
They're here.
And finally, the recipient of the 2020 Randolph Caldecott Medal for the Most Distinguished Picture Book for Children is The Undefeated, illustrated by Kadir Nelson, written by Kwame Alexander, and published by Versify, Houghton Mifflin Harcourt. Gripping portraits tell a story of strength, resiliency, and perseverance. Nelson's masterful use of perspective draws our gaze up into the eyes of these faces and gives us space to pause there. Strong compositions and use of color construct an intricate and empowering tribute to the historical and present-day Black experience. Kadir Nelson, on behalf of the 2020 Caldecott Committee, it is our privilege to recognize you and your achievement and to present you with the Randolph Caldecott Medal for the Undefeated.
The year was 1999, and my very first picture book, Brothers of the Night, was slated to be published by Dial Books for Young Readers. It was written by the actress and dancer Debbie Allen, and based on a stage production of the same name that she had both written and directed, with music composed by vocalist James Ingram for the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. The play was a hip and lively adaptation of the classic fairy tale, The 12 Dancing Princesses, and featured Miss Allen and Mr. Ingram in the lead roles. Shortly before the play began its run in the spring, Debbie mentioned to me that she was looking for an artist to illustrate a picture book version of the play. She hinted that the publisher had shown her some other artists' work, but in her words, "Child, I want someone I know to illustrate it." I eagerly volunteered. We soon traveled together to New York City to secure a publisher for the book. After settling on Dial Books to publish, I scurried home to begin creating the artwork over the following 6 weeks. Brothers of the Night was published in the fall. Shortly after its release, the director of the Kennedy Center, Derek Cartwright, shared with me just how proud he was of the book and that he had very high hopes for it. He complimented me on the illustrations, saying, "You never know, you just might get one of those little gold stickers on the front cover." I thought to myself, you never know. Just 3 years earlier, I was a senior at Pratt Institute about to graduate with a degree in communications design. Although my focus was on illustration, I had always felt deep inside that I was a painter at heart, not unlike one of my art heroes, Thomas Blackshear, a well-known illustrator who had enjoyed a very successful career. In an article I'd read about him, Blackshear emphasized that he felt that he was a fine artist who also did illustration. Fine art was at the essence of his work, and he applied his skills as a fine painter to his illustrative works. This was exactly what I aspired to do, and I adopted his mantra as my own as I continued my studies. While most of my college peers were painting small-sized works on illustration board and the like, I stretched and painted large canvases and walked across campus, carrying them to class amidst the curious and perhaps envious gazes of my classmates. You see, most illustration students were discouraged from painting at large scales because it could potentially hinder their ability to deliver quality work in a timely manner. But my professors didn't complain about my oversized paintings because I was able to do them well and on time. My idea was that once the artwork had served its purpose in a magazine, on an album cover or a book, that it should be fit to adorn the walls of galleries, museums, and the homes of collectors. I fell in love with the idea of becoming an artist at the age of 10. Over the course of 2 summers, I studied art with my uncle Michael Morris, an artist and an art teacher. Uncle Mike gave me a strong foundation in art, teaching me about color, lighting, perspective, color, etc. Perhaps his most enduring lesson was that I should always do my research to make my work as accurate as possible, and also that I shouldn't simply make pretty pictures. I should make artwork that is meaningful to me, because if it's meaningful to me, it will be meaningful to someone else. For me, it meant that my art should tell a story. When I began my career, although I loved telling stories with my work, I didn't set out to become a children's book illustrator. My very first jobs were illustrating magazine articles and creating conceptual art for motion pictures. For the feature films Amistad and Spirit, Stallion of the Cimarron, I was tasked with creating the look and feel of characters, environments, and key scenes for the stories. As exciting as it was to work in this field, I was discouraged to learn that the vast majority of the work we were creating as visual development artists would never see the light of day. I longed for the opportunity to create narrative artwork that made it to the finished product. As I neared completing work on both films, the opportunity would fall into my lap. That opportunity was Brothers of the Night. It was the beginning of a 20-plus year career of illustrating over 30 picture books. And along the way, I even learned to write and illustrate a few of my own. I'm very proud and very fortunate that many of them have even been handsomely celebrated with positive reviews and lovely awards. But if I'm being honest, all the while I still had my eye on that little gold sticker Mr. Cartwright had so pointedly mentioned. But as I approached the tail end of a decades-long picture book tenure, I'd begun to lose hope over ever having the pleasure and privilege of earning the top prize. I'll admit that perhaps early on I was a tad naive to think it would be so easy. After all, the stars have to align at just the right time and place for a thing like that to materialize. And after 20 years, it still hadn't happened for me. I figured, well, maybe it's just not meant to be. Drawing on Eastern spiritual philosophies, I let go of the idea and I began to focus on other types of work: commissions, sculpture, magazine covers, portraits, etc. But in the fall of 2016, I received an email from my agent, Stephen Malk, and soon-to-be editor, Margaret Ramo, about a poem by Kwame Alexander that he'd written and performed for ESPN's The Undefeated, a website focused on the intersection of sports, race, and culture. The poem was striking, powerful, reverent, rhythmic, and elegant. There was just the right amount of text, not too much, not too little. The word count allowed for just the right amount of space on each spread for art, which to most artists translates to most of the space on the page. I loved the poem immediately. Unfortunately, I had just signed up a couple of lengthy projects and I didn't really have time to take on a new book. But sometimes you just have to make room when something special comes your way. So I cleared a space for The Undefeated. In order to save a little time while creating the artwork, I had the idea that I could paint each spread without backgrounds, similar to some of the covers I'd done for The New Yorker. It allowed for striking silhouettes and vignettes throughout the book that could read against stark white backgrounds. Margaret loved the idea, so we forged ahead. I created a number of sketches and submitted them to the publisher, Houghton's newly created Versify imprint, helmed by Kwame Alexander. Once Margaret had a chance to review them, she sent along several comments and suggestions. Some of the comments were from an excited poet by the name of Kwame Alexander. Just to give you a little background, author comments are usually withheld from the illustrator, especially seasoned illustrators, so that the artist is allowed ample creative space to do his or her work. This space is equally proportionate to the space the author is given to write the text. So, as you might expect, I wasn't exactly thrilled to see author comments. I asked my agent to respectfully let the eager poet know that just as I hadn't intruded on his creative space while he wrote the poem, I would kindly need the same space to create the artwork. In so many words. Kwame and I joke about it to this day, but I believe he got the message. I didn't hear another peep from the poet until the art was finished, and all of his feedback was overwhelmingly positive. To be honest, however, I did consider some of his notes. But don't tell Kwame that. I don't want it to go to his head. And to be fair, toward the end of the process, Kwame stepped in to save a spread that was causing a bit of reluctance from the publisher. That spread being the one with no art, just the words and the ones who didn't. Thank you for that, brother. I think that spread in particular is crucial to communicating the impact of the idea behind the words and the overall story. The very first painting in the book is an image of the decorated Olympian Jesse Owens. However, my initial sketch for that image was of the Olympian Florence Griffith Joyner. The text reads, "This is for the unforgettable, the sweet and swift ones, who hurdled history and opened a world of possible." Joyner seemed to fit the bill perfectly, and I found a beautiful photograph of her sprinting in the 1984 Summer Olympics, with the top half of her body bathed in afternoon light and the bottom half covered by a soft bluish shadow from the upper ridges of the Los Angeles Coliseum. It was beautiful, but I felt I should open the visual story by going back a bit further in history. So I changed the image to Jesse Owens, but kept the idea of lighting only the top half of the figure. It was a striking metaphor for each historical subject, who with each turn of the page gradually emerges from the dark shadows of the past into the light of the present, ultimately becoming fully illuminated with light and full of color as the story of African Americans evolves. The second visual device I used to move the story along and diversify the visuals was that of flying creatures, birds and butterflies, ancient symbols of spirit. The spirit of African American people, the spirit of excellence, resistance, beauty, pride, love, and the universe. As each subject emerges through the arts, literature, athletics, and music, the flying creatures carry the eye through each vignette and on to the subsequent spread, reminding the reader that we are not alone in our life experiences. The last device I used was the use of white backgrounds. I'd met Kwame before we worked on this book together, but I got to know him a little bit better while we traveled around the country on a national book tour to promote the book. It was at the LA Times Book Festival that I heard Kwame speak about how the poem came to be, as a teachable moment for his daughter, as a love letter to America, a celebration of the election of President Barack Obama, and a reaction to the events that triggered the Black Lives Matter movement. Kwame spoke about why he loved poetry and that he loved the amount of white space that the carefully chosen selection of words leaves on the page. I discovered that quite serendipitously, by painting each vignette with an abundance of white space around it, I was echoing precisely what Kwame had created with his words. Although I thought that painting the art without backgrounds would save a bit of time, the irony was that I hadn't saved any time at all, because each spread took just about as long as it would have otherwise. My great fortune was that by removing the backgrounds, it created a visual language that gave the book exactly what it needed. It was fine art juxtaposed with masterful poetry, and together, their powerful chemistry told a complete story. I want to thank Kwame for writing such an incredible work of art. I love this book, and I love your work in it, and I'm very glad to know and work with you. If you write nothing else in this world, you wrote The Undefeated, and it is a masterpiece of literature. I want to thank my editor, Margaret Ramo, for trusting me with this book and fully supporting it. Thank you to my publisher, Catherine Onder, for publishing this book so magnificently, to Cara Llewellyn for your exquisitely beautiful book design, and to everyone at Versify and Houghton Mifflin Harcourt for supporting The Undefeated. You have done masterful work. I want to thank my super agent, Stephen Malk. You are truly a blessing for my career and a great friend whom I treasure. Thank you to my wife, Dr. Jungmiwa Bullock Nelson. I treasure your love, insight, and encouragement, and your prediction that The Undefeated would receive this wonderful recognition. I'd like to thank my Uncle Mike and my mother for encouraging and protecting and supporting my gift. And lastly, and perhaps most importantly, I want to thank the Caldecott and Newbery committees and the cadre of librarians who took on the monumental task of reading and evaluating thousands of books, and for choosing The Undefeated. Thank you for holding up all the artists and authors who do this work. The great work that you do is no small task, and weighted with monumental responsibility. From the very bottom of my heart, I thank you with everything that I have. Thank you for acknowledging The Undefeated. Thank you for honoring this story. It's been a long journey to this stage, and thanks to you, I finally got that little gold sticker. I will treasure it forever. Thank you. And alas, I get to hold the Caldecott Medal for the first time. Thank you.
Hi, friends of the interwebs. I'm Krishna Grady, the chair of the 2020 John Newbery Award Committee. As many of you know, the John Newbery Award is given every year to the author of the most distinguished contribution to American literature for children. Tonight, we celebrate the honor winners and our medal winner. Over the past year, I have had the immense joy and pleasure of working with the funniest, the hardest working, and the most mindful library professionals. We laughed together, we cried together, we Zoomed together, and we read oodles of books. That is an official number. And it led us to this night. Please join me in recognizing the 2020 John Newbery Committee. Give them several claps and many, many snaps. I am hyena happy and peacock proud to present our honor books. This year, the committee chose 4 honor books. And somehow, by chance, the theme of resilience resounded throughout, a very timely theme for troubling times. They are in alphabetical order by title.
And here they are, your 2020 John Newbery Award Committee.
Genesis Begins Again by Alicia D. Williams. Published by Caton Glowey Books, Athenaeum Books for Young Readers, an imprint of Simon & Schuster Children's Publishing. Genesis Begins Again tells the story of 13-year-old Genesis, struggling with colorism and self-loathing. Her dark skin is just one of the 96 things she does not like about herself. This powerful novel deals with family struggles and internalized racism. Williams' words will wow you, and a hopeful ending will leave both Genesis and readers seeing the possibility of self-worth. Other Words for Home by Jasmine Warga, published by Balzer Plus Bray, an imprint of HarperCollins Publishers. This is the story of Jude and her mother, both Muslim, who flee war-torn Syria for a new life in America. This novel in verse is an inspiring story of resilience. It explores themes of family, prejudice, and what home truly means in a timely and honest manner. Scary Stories for Young Foxes by Christian McKay Heidecker, published by Henry Holt Books for Young Readers, an imprint of Macmillan Children's Publishing Group. 7 foxes in the dark and twisted antler wood want to hear scary stories, and they will. Imagine a character with gooey eyes. Imagine trying to slink away from the Golgothersh's grin, and imagine Beatrix Potter as a villain. Adventure, survival, and humor all celebrate the importance of story, even scary ones. The Undefeated by Kwame Alexander, published by Versify, Houghton Mifflin Harcourt. The Undefeated is for us. Written in sparse poetic verse, the contributions of African Americans are celebrated and explored. The reader is invited on a journey of dreaming, of persevering, and of bravery. The past intersects with the present, leaving readers forging their own paths of discovery. America, this is for you.
Hello, welcome all. I want to first introduce Alicia D. Williams, author of Genesis Begins Again.
Hello.
Jasmine Warga, author of Other Words for Home. Christian McKay Heidecker, author of Scary Stories for Young Foxes.
I am overjoyed to be here with you all today.
Kwame Alexander, author of The Undefeated.
Woohoo!
I'd love to introduce Jerry Kraft, Newbery Medal winner and author of New Kid.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm so grateful that I get to be here to congratulate all of you. Though we're all apart, we're physically not together. And though many of us may feel disconnected from everyone around us, your books have connected all of us and have given us hope for our world and for offering comforting, surprising, and exciting words and stories for kids. So may I say, Jerry, winner of the Newbery, congratulations. Kwame, Christian, Jasmine, and Alicia, Congratulations. And may I be the one to lift a toast to you. And thank you.
Jerry, do you have any Newbery influences, books or authors that you love?
So what's so interesting is that I wasn't a reader growing up, so I had no relationship with my local library, even though it was around the corner. So when we had two sons, I wanted to make them readers. So we started with, the Dr. Seuss books, and then from there went to Captain Underpants and things like that. And then as they got older, I kept reading to them. And I remember getting a copy of Bud Not Buddy. And they had these two little round stickers on it. So I assumed that somebody thought it was good, but I really didn't know the history behind it, And I read it to them and absolutely loved it. And they loved it. And it was, an African-American boy. And it was not, like he was on an adventure, and, he would overcome stuff. He's looking for his dad. It was all the things I was looking for. So then afterwards, I started looking for those two little round stickers. And I have to say that I did meet Christopher Paul Curtis once, briefly, a few years ago, and that was pretty amazing because I got a chance to tell him. And there was this other guy who I knew, an author, who it seemed like we were coming up at the same time. And we had done a Skype thing, and we talked about how we, were kind of self-publishing, and, it was kind of a rough thing. And then one day I look up, and this guy had won the Newbery Medal. And I was like, wow, that's a Kwame Alexander dude that I hung out with that time, and nice guy, because I had started going to his book fairs and following his career. And to see someone that I had actually met, like literally climb to the pinnacle of the children's book industry, was inspirational.
My father, made me read in 1977, Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry. I didn't want to read it. I wanted to go play with my friends. I wanted to hang out and have a good time and go skateboarding. And he was like, go sit down and read this book. And it had a big gold medal sticker on it. I was like, what's that? And I read it. And I loved it. I loved Cassie's story. I loved all about I loved what they were talking about land. I'd been dealing with a lot of that and just seeing how land impacted my family. And I couldn't put it down. And I loved it. And who would have known all these years later that I would have like a direct link with Mildred Taylor and that book in my own writerly life. Christopher Paul Curtis, Bud Not Buddy. I had a nephew who didn't want to read, and I gave him that book for Christmas. I gave books for Christmas. That's always been my thing. Like my nephews and nieces, they hate when they see me coming on Christmas Day. Like, oh, here he comes with another book. And I gave my nephew that book, and he couldn't put it down. 25 years later, I would end up writing the introduction to the 25th anniversary of that book. I just think it's just an interesting sort of mesh of the real world and the art, and how those two things are so linked to us. So those are two books that really stand out, two authors that really stand out.
When I was trying to decide how scary to make scary stories for young foxes, it really helped to have books like The Graveyard Book, where Bod's whole family is killed on the first page, or The Tale of Despereaux. But deeper than that, The One and Only Ivan was really important for animal cruelty and the underneath for giving amazing characterization to wild animals. And then, of course, there's Mrs. Frisbee and the Rats of Nim for just like pulse pounding, like semi-realistic nature stories. And then there was El Defo, which was a huge inspiration when it came to writing about disabilities. But the Newbery book that I always really like to tout, because I just don't hear it talked about enough, is Good Masters, Sweet Ladies. And this was the book that I didn't think that I wanted to read. You know, I looked at the cover and I was like, nah, I don't think that's for me at all. But it turned out to be one of the most gripping and terrifying children's books I've ever read. But all of the horror is based in class suppression, which meant that there was a reason to talk about the horror. There was a reason to dig deep and go to that scary place instead of just trying to scare the socks off of kids.
As a kid, the first book I remember completely falling in love with was Charlotte's Web, which was read aloud to me by my mom. And I remember that last line saying something along the lines of, Charlotte was a good writer and a good friend, and you often find one or the other, but not both. And having this moment of thinking, like, I want to be a good writer and a good friend, and that book making just such an impression on me. And then The Bridge to Terabitha is probably my favorite book ever. I've been thinking a lot about that book because the new thing that I'm working on is kind of loosely inspired by how much that book meant to me, but in this idea that we can tell the truth to kids, a really hard truth, and that sometimes that truth is comforting. And I've returned to that message of that book so many times over the course of my life when really hard things have happened that seem very senseless. And this idea that I feel like that book did tell me the truth, but also gave me hope, and the fact that like hope and hard truths can be mixed together. And that would bring me to when I was now a grown-up and was returning to reading books for kids, thinking about this idea of wanting to write for this audience, reading Kate DiCamillo's Because of Winn-Dixie, and seeing again that hard truth paired with honesty. I'm a massive Kate DiCamillo fan, and I think she's been recognized multiple times, but Because of Winn-Dixie is really, really special to me. And then lastly would be Feathers by Jacqueline Woodson. And that there was something about that book that really, really spoke to me about feeling like an outsider in all circumstances in different communities, in the way that she wove that Emily Dickinson poem into the book too. And just, again, I'm a massive Jacqueline Woodson fan.
Walk Two Moons by Sharon Creech was one I look at for structure as I'm continuing on a work in progress. And again, the heart of grieving and this, but also falling in love with a spunky character that's a girl character, and Bridge to Terabithia was another story for me that resonated. I'm also a Kate DiCamillo fan, so I pull back her storytelling and look at how she uses the voice of the character to bring me in. And I love Brown Girl Dreaming for the prose and the rhythm, and everything so much. Even though I didn't live that life, it resonated for me. Now, if I had to choose one, but if there's one book that I can say that spoke to me, was But Not Buddy. And I have to echo everyone else who mentioned it. There's something to say for this little boy from the very title, who lets you know he knows who he is at such a young age. I'm Bud, not Buddy. Don't call me Buddy. I fell in love with him because he was the voice leapt off the page, but he was so courageous. To have this longing, but to move past the longing and to leave Flint to go to Grand Rapids to find his grandfather, and still to have these child fears. Now, when I think of representation, well, we think of representation, we like to put it in categories sometimes. I also like to think of them and think of representation by names. Like my daughter's name is Naila. She's never seen her name in print, and people act like they can't pronounce it. So when I see something unique like that, I think, oh my gosh, when she cried and saw her name for the first time in print, I realized that that was something that was missing. So But Not Buddy, the representation of a setting. Flint, you don't find Flint or Grand Rapids anywhere in literature, but that's a whole town that is invisible, that is now popular because of the water epidemic. They don't have clean water, but it was a thriving town. But to see Flint, kids are like, wow, in these smaller rural areas, we do exist. So I was so proud to see that. Well, I'm from Detroit, but I was so proud to see that a unique setting was used for that story, for representation.
Thank you all so much. And I want to once again raise a glass to all of you. I am, as my dad used to say, hyena happy and peacock proud. To have these books, to be on this slate, to share them with the world, and just excited to see what you do next. But thank you so much to you.
Cheers, Krishna.
Thank you. And finally, the recipient of the 2020 John Newbery Medal for the most distinguished contribution to American literature for children is New Kid by Jerry Craft, published by Harper, an imprint of HarperCollins Publishing. Jerry Craft creates an intimate portrait in the very relatable life of 7th grader Jordan Banks. This snapshot of life manages to speak to African American kids, to immigrant kids, to kids who feel like they don't belong, and truthfully, many adults. If you've ever felt like life was too much or you weren't enough, you can read this story and you can relate. Craft creates a story that is textually and visually intriguing. Jordan is you. Jordan is other. Jordan is who we hope to be when we come out on the other side of our story. Jerry Craft, on behalf of the 2020 John Newbery Committee, it is our privilege to recognize you and your achievement and to present you with the John Newbery Medal for New Kid.
Hi, I'm Jerry Craft, author and illustrator of New Kid. I'd like to begin by thanking the 2020 Newbery Award Selection Committee, chaired by the incomparable Krishna Grady. Thank you for the tremendous honor of making New Kid the first graphic novel in your 98-year history to receive your prestigious medal. I would also like to thank the ALA for making this moment possible. I'd hoped to celebrate with you all in person, and I still hope I will get the opportunity to do so before too long. As I reflect on my life as a reader, my path led me from Dr. Seuss to Spider-Man comic books to practically nothing but an occasional magazine article. I always could read, I just never enjoyed it. I was literally an adult before I picked up a book as a form of entertainment. Until that moment, the only books I read were reference volumes on how to use things like Adobe Photoshop. I'll never cease to be amazed when I look back at my less than auspicious beginning as a reader and follow it all the way to winning the prestigious Newbery Medal for the most distinguished contribution to American literature for children. I'm certain even my wildest adolescent imagination would not have predicted this outcome. Ever since I first began to visit schools and libraries across the country, I've always been comforted by the sight of so many librarians working tirelessly to connect the right book to the right reader. Unfortunately, I did not get to have that experience. Although I grew up near a public library in the Washington Heights section of New York City, I rarely visited as it was almost never open. And the few times I did get to venture inside, it was because that dreaded time of year when I had to write a paper for school. Inside, it was quiet, except for the squeak of my Pro Kids on a newly waxed floor. I don't ever remember being warmly greeted or having a relationship with a librarian. Only the dull colors and musty smells of a place I would rather not be. It was not a place of comfort, joy, or relaxation, the total opposite of what I have had the privilege to witness now. Meanwhile, 10 blocks in the opposite direction was a comic book store on Broadway, where my dad and I were warmly greeted by an older man named Freddie, who was always glad to see us. I spent many happy hours looking through back issues to fill my collection of Marvel Team-Up or The Silver Surfer. It was a totally different experience. I felt welcome as a reader. I don't remember my elementary school, School on the Hill in Harlem, or my junior high school, St. Matthew's Lutheran School in Inwood, as ever having a librarian or a library for that matter. At home, my dad read the New York Daily News each day, while my mom always seemed to have subscriptions to black magazines such as Essence, Ebony, and occasionally Jet. The Sunday newspaper comic section was always a big deal, as I rushed to read Peanuts or Broomhilda or Hagar the Horrible. And then I got an Atari. The end. Okay, obviously that's not really the end of my reading, but my entertainment from childhood to my teenage years consisted mainly of playing outside with my friends, stickball, football, skateboards, my Atari, reading Marvel comics, and making my own comics. But since I never really considered myself a reader, I never considered myself a writer. I just called myself an artist. The only book I remember reading in elementary school or junior high school was Jonathan Livingston Seagull by Richard Bach. I guess it was about a bird. And I only know the author's name now because I recently Googled the book. But because most of my teachers confiscated our comic books whenever they caught us reading them in class, I was conditioned early on to think that fun reading was illegal and real reading had to be painful. And so it was. High school was a different story. Now I was expected to read a lot. But how was a kid from Washington Heights, who was never taught how to appreciate books, expected to now be able to read As I Lay Dying by William Faulkner, or The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock by T.S. Eliot, or anything by Anton Chekhov? For me, the biggest tragedy of Theodore's Dreiser's An American Tragedy was that it was 1,216 pages long. Why? Just why? I remember devising a plan with my friend Rick, where he would read the first 600 pages while I read the last 600 pages, and then we would compare notes. That plan did not go well. That's why I feel so strongly today when a parent gets angry that their kid is only reading graphic novels. I wish that they could understand that their kid is reading, and reading something for pleasure, an experience that I did not have in my youth. One of the most important and transformative gifts a child can have is a love of reading. The first big boy book that I ever remember finishing didn't come until high school. It was also the first book that I ever really enjoyed, Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. It was 384 pages. What made that book so special? In retrospect, the protagonist was as close to a mirror as I had ever experienced, which is weird since I was a black kid born in Harlem, while he was an orphaned white boy named Pip who lived in 19th century London. But at least he was a kid who not only had dreams, but great expectations. And just as important, those characters in the book had great expectations for him as well. I never saw that in any book about a kid who actually looked like me. The kids who looked like me expected nothing. They just tried to survive. Maybe I just saw the wrong books, but I was never exposed to mirrors in literature. Only runaway slaves, tormented kids of the civil rights era, and victim of gang violence or police brutality. Not that those aren't important stories. They are. But so are stories that show us being happy. I felt like the mirrors were often broken to the point that they became dangerous shards of glass that sliced into the comfort and naivete of my childhood. For me, it was never enough for a story to have a joyful ending if the rest of the book dealt with the protagonist's seemingly endless suffering. So there was only Pip. Now imagine the memories I would have of that book if Pip had been African American. That was Jerry Craft the reader. Then there's Jerry Craft the writer, and how I managed to become one without being the other. As far as I can remember, I've always loved to draw. Going to see movies as a kid and making comic versions of the story to send to my brother, who was a Marine in Okinawa, Japan, was great fun. Those are probably my first comic strips, but once again, there were very few mirrors. There was Franklin from Peanuts and Lieutenant Flat from Beetle Bailey, but they were never the main characters. I didn't see that until Wee Pals by Maury Turner, which also became a TV show called Kid Power. and Luther by Brumsick Brandon. After graduating from the School of Visual Arts, I was inspired by a new wave of Black comic strips, including Curtis by Ray Billingsley and Where I'm Coming From by Barbara Brandon. And I decided to create my own comic strip called Mama's Boys, which is about a mom raising her 2 teenage sons while running the family bookstore. None of the syndicates wanted it. They already had a Black comic strip. Eventually, it was distributed by King Features Syndicate to smaller papers across the country. And this lasted for more than 20 years. I made almost no money from it, but I wanted to show people that kids of color do regular stuff too. It's like eating pizza, or going to the mall, or watching TV with their families. I wanted to show the all too often missing slice of humanity of African American lives, and to call out that lack of humanity whenever some people hear that a Black or brown teen is killed, when they immediately think that there will be one less kid who will grow up to be in a gang, rather than thinking that humanity has possibly just lost a future Kwame Alexander, or Jason Reynolds, or Renee Watson, or Jacqueline Woodson, or Eric Velasquez, or Elizabeth Acevedo, or Kadir Nelson. Kids who grew up to make huge contributions to our world. So my next step was to turn the comic strip into a book. But even though nearly 2 decades had passed, books about slavery, civil rights, police encounters, and gangs still disproportionately represented Black life. You may never see that single-story narratives as a problem unless you actually were a Black kid or have raised them. But just imagine being a kid of color when, after having your teacher read a book out loud to the class, your best friend turns to you to proclaim in front of everyone, "If you were my slave, I would have freed you." In that young mind, this is said with the absolutely best of intentions. But what would hearing that do to you as a kid? Or you as a parent raising that kid? Or imagine what it's like when your child, whom you love more than anything in the world and have sworn to protect, comes home to say that a not-so-well-meaning boy told him that they had to get on the back of the line at recess or sit in the back of the school bus because they're Black. I wanted to create stories that show the side of African American life that isn't steeped in misery. A book that kids of color can proudly embrace and other kids can still relate to. But all I got from publishers were rejection, rejection, rejection. So in 1997, I began to publish my very own books. Years later, I began to help others to publish their books. And then in 2014, after helping to publish nearly 36 books, I got the chance to illustrate a book for Scholastic called The 0 Degree Zombie Zone, written by Patrick Henry Bass and edited by Andrea Davis Pinckney. That experience showed me that I was, in fact, worthy of being a real author and illustrator. Around that time, I'd already begun to think of doing a graphic novel loosely based on my life and the lives of my sons. Since each of us had the experience of being one of the few kids of color in a predominantly white private school, but, my conditioning that Black books are only for Black kids, or Black books have to be tragic, placed me in the creative ditch that even I had to struggle to climb out of. What would I have to do for a book like this to be embraced by everyone? Would I have to make the characters animals? Would I have to write a book from a white kid's perspective of what it's like to have a Black friend? These are ideas that I actually began to sketch out until they felt like dirt rushing in from the sides of that dish to bury my creative soul alive. And so, after many sleepless nights of reflection and rejection and countless revisions, I created New Kid, a middle grade graphic novel about a 12-year-old boy from Washington Heights, section of New York City, whose parents make him go to an elite private school in Riverdale, where he is one of the few kids of color in his class. A book that has caused teachers to come to me and share stories of kids who have never enjoyed reading a book before. These teachers have told me that they're students of color who have broken down and sobbed because they have never seen themselves in a book. I've had teachers Skype and Zoom from places like New Zealand and China to tell me just how much their students relate to the character of Jordan Banks. I've had parents, teachers, and book groups thank me for creating a book that has inspired amazing conversations that have helped to change the culture of their schools. With New Kid, I wrote the book that I wish I had when I was a kid. I wrote the book that I wish I could have fond memories of today, of how it gave me hope and changed my life. I wrote the book I wish I had been able to give to my sons and watch them carry it around proudly. A book that when I woke up and saw them in the morning, that book was flipped over on their nightstand so they wouldn't lose their place, and that they would read it while having breakfast and also on the ride to school. A book that their white friends would read and realize that Black fathers and grandfathers and mothers who love their kids really do exist. A book that showed its readers that they are just as good, just as smart, and that like other kids, it was also okay for them to have great expectations. In closing, I would like to thank my family, Jay, Aaron, and Artir, for their love and support throughout this 30-year struggle to become an overnight success. My sons continue to be my inspiration, as well as my editors. My agent, Judy Hanson, who has fought with me, and importantly, fought for me to bring New Kid to life. My amazing team from HarperCollins, starting with Suzanne Murphy, Rosemary Brosnan, and my editor, Andrew Eliopoulos, for believing in me enough to give me the opportunity to tell my story my way. My first publishing family from Scholastic with Deborah Dorfman, Andrea Davis Pinkney, and David Saylor. Barbara Slate, who gave me my first job in comics, Andrea Colvin, Jeff Kinney, Calvin Reed, Charlie Kotzman, Marva Allen, Jacqueline Woodson, Kwame Alexander, Pam Allen, and all the others who have always made me feel like I belong at the adult dinner table. Thank you to my fans, the teachers, the librarians, the book groups, my colorist, Jim Callahan. Thank you to the creators of the graphic novels that helped pave the way for New Kid to win this honor. Raina Telgemeier, Jean Luen Yang, Cece Bell, David Small, Jared Kosciuszka, Kazuo Kibiishi, Victoria Jameson, and so many others. And once again to the Newbery Committee, who gave me the absolute best phone call I have ever received in my life, and the greatest honor. You've shown the world that the graphic novels are indeed real reading. Thank you.
Greetings. My name is Sylvia Vardell, and I had the honor of chairing the 2020 Legacy Committee. With 24 distinguished recipients since 1954, the Children's Literature Legacy Award is given to an author or illustrator whose books, published in the U.S., have made a substantial and lasting contribution to literature for children through books that demonstrate integrity and respect for all children's lives and experiences. Our committee of 5 spent a lovely year reading the bodies of work of several distinguished nominees, and in January selected our recipient. It was a pleasure to collaborate with this terrific committee, and I thank them for their diligence and commitment, their openness, and their kindness. Our 2020 Legacy winner, Kevin Henkes, is an artist and author at the top of his craft, with a legacy of work full of honest emotion and insight, warm and gentle humor, and intelligent, nuanced illustrations. A lifelong Wisconsin native, growing up in a family of 5 children, Henkes wanted to be an artist from a very young age. At 19, he traveled to New York to get his first book published. Fast forward 40 years, he has now written and illustrated more than 50 books for children and earned a Caldecott Award and honor, as well as 2 Newbery honors, among many other recognitions. Henkes approaches challenging subjects with grace, sensitivity, and hopefulness. He's both an inventive creator of picture books as well as a gifted novelist, and in each case reveals a deep respect for the vulnerability and resilience of young people. Today is a good day, and we are so happy. Whether it's a full moon, a purple purse, a penny, a chrysanthemum, an egg, or an ocean, thanks to Kevin Henkes, we are never all alone. No more waiting. It's my honor to present the 2020 Children's Literature Legacy Award to Kevin Henkes.
Yay! Yay!
Go, Kevin!
Woo!
Yay!
Woo!
Woo!
Good evening. When I found out on January 26th that I'd won the Legacy Award, I was ecstatic. However, it didn't take me long, about an hour, to start fretting about my speech. It's just the way I am. I began working on my speech right away and had a solid draft by the end of the week. The world has changed since then, and we are living in particularly challenging times. More than once I debated rewriting my speech, but decided to leave it as I first wrote it. So imagine we're all together in a vast, crowded ballroom in Chicago. Imagine that social distancing and sheltering in place are not things we've come to know. Imagine that we have a decent, competent president. Imagine. Every few years, I reread the collected letters between Eudora Welty and William Maxwell. Maxwell was Welty's sometime editor and dear friend. Like Welty, he was an esteemed writer of fiction, one of my favorites. The correspondence reveals a long, loving relationship between two creative people and offers an unusual, intimate glimpse into the writing process. Eudora Welty was an admirer of Jane Austen. Upon visiting Jane Austen's house in England, Welty wrote the following description of the house to Maxwell. "It looks big but is really small, the opposite of her novels." This sharp-sighted, distinctive, artfully put observation screams to be quoted. It looks big but is really small, the opposite of her novels. It cogently states what I try so hard to do with my books, to keep them tightly focused, domestic, grounded in the ordinary, the realm in which I feel most comfortable, but to allow them to be expansive. Kathleen Shine has written about this. She says, "A trash novel tells you everything you already know about a way of life you will in fact never know. A serious novel tells you in one way or another what you don't know about the familiar, the personal, the dailiness of life, and so about life itself." I try as best I can when I'm building a book to dig my emotional foundation deep, to layer details with precision and clarity, to stay true to my private vision, and always to be mindful of the beauty of form. Admittedly, I am more drawn to the ripple than the wave, but when rendered well, something small, the familiar, the particular, can be as big as life itself. When I visit schools or libraries, children often ask me how long it takes to make a book. I give a sensible answer, a generalization of sorts, because each book is different. But the more truthful answer would be that it took my entire life. Everything I've lived and done goes into each book. So, if a book is a house, its author is an architect and builder. And here is this builder's beginning. I was born in 1960 in Racine, Wisconsin. I'm one of 5 children, the 4th. Until I was nearly 7 years old, I was the youngest. Then, surprise of all surprises, my younger brother arrived. I went from being the baby of the family to being an older brother. I think that my position in my family has made me a better writer. It has helped me understand what it feels like to be both an older sibling and a younger one. I know what it feels like to be left out, and I know what it feels like to not want someone to tag along. I understand my characters Sheila Ray and Lily, and I understand their younger siblings, Louise and Julius. I understand Billy Miller, but I understand his little sister Sal, too. I've always loved to draw, and I cannot remember a time when I did not think of myself as an artist. Although we didn't have a lot of books in our house, my mother made it a point to take us to the public library regularly. It was part of our routine. It's just what one did, and I'm grateful to my mother for that. Books were my exposure to art. They fed my soul. They were everything to me. I needed them. Charlotte Rainsford, one of the characters in Penelope Lively's novel, How It All Began, is a lover of books. She needs them. Lively describes beautifully the importance of books in Charlotte's life. Forever reading has been central, the necessary fix, the support system. Her life has been informed by reading. She has read not just for distraction, sustenance, to pass the time, but she has read in a state of primal innocence, reading for enlightenment, for instruction even. She has read to find out if things are the same for others as they are for her, then discovering that frequently they are not. She has read to find out what it is that other people experience that she is missing. She is as much a product of what she has read as of the way in which she has lived. She is like millions of others built by books, for whom books are an essential foodstuff, who could starve without. I am built by books, and I am a builder of books. That's my job, the only job I've ever had. I was a junior in high school when I decided that I wanted to write and illustrate children's books. And I was 19 when I was offered a contract for my first book. It was 40 years ago next month that I went to New York City for a week in search of a publisher. 40 years ago that I met Susan Hirschman. It was a glorious day when I had my appointment at Green Willow Books. Susan took me in, she told me she'd publish my book, and she did something else. She told me which appointments with other publishers to keep and which to cancel. And then she said, "Tell them you've been offered a contract, but if you fall in love with someone at another house, come and let me know and we'll talk about it." It was an amazing thing for her to say, but how could I fall in love with someone else? Green Willow had been my first choice and is the only publisher I've ever had. Susan did something else on that first trip. She had me return to Green Willow every day I was in New York to check in. On the last day, she handed me the keys to the locked, glass-fronted bookcases filled with Green Willow books that lined the hallway. She told me to pick whatever I wanted and to show her what I chose. I picked 2 books and brought them to her. She gave me a look and said, "You may pick more than 2," and waved me off. I picked 2 more and returned to her office. She gave me another look and said, "I'll tell you once more. You may pick whatever you want. We can put the books in boxes and send them home." To Susan's great delight, the third time, I picked more than 2, many more, from Jane Gardam to Virginia Hamilton, to Donald Cruz, to Arnold and Anita Lobel, to Byron Barton, to Tana Hoban, to Vera B. Williams. I was in book heaven, or rather simply, I was in heaven. And when the books in boxes arrived home to Wisconsin, I wrote my name, July 22nd, 1980, and gift of Susan Hirschman on the inside cover of each one. On that initial visit to New York and Green Willow, and on those that followed over the years, I felt so fully human, so alive, as if I'd found exactly what I was meant to do with my life. I felt as if my skin was sending off sparks and all the world could see. I began as a picture book maker, but I like to build other kinds of books too. It was Susan who nudged me onward when I attempted to write a novel. After sending her a few very rough, very uneven pages of what I imagined would be my first novel, she wrote me a letter that included the following. "I have never doubted that you are a real writer, so the fact that you are writing a real novel comes as no surprise." I kept the folded letter with me at all times for a while. It was, and is, a beautiful, effective talisman. It was my current editor, Virginia Duncan, who asked me to try writing a book for beginning readers. I was one of those parents who read to his kids in utero. Books were a huge part of my family's daily life from the very start. And I remember with great fondness when both of my kids began to read. To see it unfold was mysterious and wonderful. Watching them fall in love with books for beginning readers was pure joy for me. And it was different than their continuing love for picture books. This kind of love was new, and their sense of ownership was obvious. And even though the thought of trying my hand at books for beginning readers had been on the edges of my mind for many years, it wasn't until Virginia suggested it outright that I attempted it. That's what a good editor does. Suggests things, asks the right questions, sees with a sharpened eye, an eye that not only sees what's on the page, but also what's in the heart and mind of the writer. A good editor is a builder, too. He or she builds a shelter within which the writer can create freely. I've been lucky. Susan and Virginia are the only editors I've had. Brilliant author-illustrator M.B. Goffstein wrote, There is one way for your book to look. It is your duty to find it. An art director helps with that search. Ava Weiss and Paul Zachris are the only art directors I've worked with. Ava for the first half of my career, and now Paul. Time and time again over the years, Ava and Paul have suggested things. A typeface, a particular paper stock, a slightly different trim size that were exactly right, just what was needed. The details of bookmaking, the color of the headbands on a novel, the weight of the paper, moving an illustration or a line of text a fraction of an inch matter enormously to me. And so these things always matter to them, and I can build my little houses knowing that I am understood. Librarians can provide another kind of shelter. They surely did and do for me. And I'm grateful to all the librarians who have been an important part of my life, all my life. Since I became a published author and illustrator, I've met so many wonderful librarians and gotten to know some of you well. I admire what all of you do for kids and for books and those of us who create them. Thank you for your support and enthusiasm. Thank you for keeping my books alive and well. Special thanks to Nancy Elsmo, Ginny Moore Cruz, Barb Barstow, Amy Kelman, Dudley Carlson, Maria Salvador, Betsy Hearn, Caroline Ward, and Barbara Bader. Always thanks to my wife, Laura Dronzik, my first reader, first everything, and to our children, Will and Clara. 15 years ago, I was in Chicago in a ballroom on a night similar to this. My book, Kitten's First Full Moon, was being honored with the Caldecott Medal. One moment from that night stands out more than any other. The second I finished my speech, Will and Clara, then 9 and 7, leaped to their feet before anyone else. They were smiling and clapping wildly. And in that moment, they were the only people in the room, the only people in the world. Alice Munro wrote, "A story is not like a road to follow. It's more like a house. You go inside and stay there for a while, wandering back and forth and settling where you like and discovering how the room and corridors relate to each other, how the world outside is altered by being viewed from these windows. And you, the visitor, the reader, are altered as well by being in this enclosed space, whether it is ample and easy or full of crooked turns, or sparsely or opulently furnished. You can go back again and again, and the house, the story, always contains more than you saw the last time." I like thinking about books as buildings or houses. M.B. Goffstein has referred to them as temples. In her book, My Editor, M.B. Goffstein's first-person narrator, a writer, says, "Day and night, I work hard to rebuild a little temple no one knows is there. I tear it apart and rebuild it the old way, take it apart and remake it the new way, take it apart and suddenly see how it goes." It's work to build a book. Some days it seems impossible. The poet Mary Oliver has said, "Writing memorably is done slowly and in solitude, and it is as improbable as carrying water in a sieve." Improbable and mysterious. The crafts of writing and illustrating are as mysterious to me now as they were 40 years ago when I began my career. But when you suddenly see how it goes, it's glorious. When a book is finished and I've had time to think about it, and I've begun to talk about it, it might seem as though everything had been precisely planned, that I had a concrete idea of how it all was supposed to be. But even with a blueprint, a general idea of what I think I want, that's not the case. Sometimes I even surprise myself by discovering things, symbols, repeated images, layers of meaning that I hadn't consciously known I'd put into place. Sometimes I surprise myself by seeing things I didn't know I knew. More often than not, the house is not quite the house I originally had in mind. But no matter how ordinary, how familiar, how small it looks, I hope it has substance. I hope it is memorable. I hope in its own humble way that it's big. And so, thank you, Legacy Committee members, Chair Sylvia Vardell, Lucia Acosta, Rob Bittner, Louise LaRue, and Jessica Hilbin-Schwartz. I am so honored to have been your choice, honored beyond words to be among the list of past recipients. The poet Friedrich Schiller said, "Man is made of ordinary things, and habit is his nurse." I agree. However, for me, habit has been altered nicely since I learned I was to receive the Legacy Award. And tonight, and everything about it, is anything but ordinary. Thank you.
That concludes this year's celebration. I encourage you to stay connected with the Association for Library Service to Children by visiting our website, where you can learn more about our awards and our work. I am sincerely grateful to all who could attend, live or later, to celebrate this year's Newbery, Caldecott, and Legacy honorees. Thank you.